Hi, class. So we are back with our part 2 for this chapter. And we left by talking about the importance of psychology. But I'd like to transition a little bit. So we have a younger brother. He is actually in business. And I often talk to him about different research studies that I've come across. And inevitably, he always says to me something like, yeah, but why did somebody study that? Isn't it just common sense? And so this brings us to maybe the difference between psychology versus common sense and the role research can actually play in this relationship. So in fact, research oftentimes turns up very unexpected events in human behavior. So let's take, for example, cohabitating before marriage. So we've seen currently more and more people who are living together prior to getting married. And when we ask people why they are doing that, most often individuals say something to the effect of, I want to try out my relationship, right? I want to see if this is going to work before I commit to getting married. And this makes sense, right? Because you might think that couples are sort of testing out the compatibility of their relationship and that divorce rates would fall. I mean, after all, there aren't going to be any surprises here. You've shared a bathroom. You know how many cups of coffee that your partner needs before they're going to be nice. And so you're really getting to know them. However, when researchers were looking through this and were collecting data on this, what they ended up finding, and not just one research study, but numerous research studies, kept on finding that couples who lived together actually ended up having a higher rate of divorce than couples who didn't cohabitate before marrying. And prior to the divorce, these couples also had lower rates of marital satisfaction. So of course, people were just baffled by this, right? I mean, why is that? We had come up with this idea that testing out the waters is great. It's a wonderful step. All right, so, we had a bunch of researchers sort of spinning their wheels. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Sort of through subsequent research studies, it was kind of found that a lot of people who were engaging in cohabitation were also much more open to the idea of divorce, right? So if you're open to the idea of trying out the relationship to see if it works, perhaps you're also more likely to be open to, well, if this marriage doesn't work out, I'm all right with the idea of divorce. But researchers, didn't find a change between marriage and dating, right? So for those people who dated and then they got married, they didn't find some of these same differences, right? Because that was part of what they were interested in looking at. So, researchers are saying, okay, maybe if I am open to the idea of a divorce, maybe there's, at least when I go from dating and then getting married, there's a whole new level of novelty in my relationship. I mean, if I'm dating somebody and we're cohabitating, we're like, okay, yeah, this is going to work. Now we just continue our relationship. So maybe people need something extra to show that the relationship has changed, right? But researchers didn't stop digging because now we're saying, all right, you cohabitate, you're more likely to get divorced. But is that the whole story? And what we ended up finding out is that it's not. In fact, researchers ended up finding out that cohabitating does not actually lead to a decrease in marital satisfaction and an increase in divorce if two things happen. One, when the cohabitation occurred only with the eventual marital partner, so you're not cohabitating with a bunch of other people, that this was kind of like your one and only time you were very serious about this relationship in particular. And two, if a couple actually was engaged first and then decided to move in together. So based on this, you can actually see that research is an ongoing process. I mean, we're constantly shifting and changing what we think and what we know based on information that we receive. And so we do research for lots of different reasons, right? To help us understand kind of the background of what's taking place, to help us understand human behavior. But it also allows us to turn up things that we might not expect. And that's really quite fascinating. So how do we engage in that research? We do this through what is known as the scientific approach, okay? And this is by using the scientific method where we are coming up with a hypothesis, where we are asking that question and then collecting data and interpreting the results. Very much like a science fair project that you probably did in elementary school. But the scientific approach includes more than just that collection of data, more than just coming up with a theory and having an analysis on it. The first thing to remember is that it's constantly evolving. And so we might have a theory, we might collect data, we might have an analysis, we might come up with an idea. It may support the theory that we had, or it may cause us to reevaluate that theory. And just because we have information now doesn't mean that we don't have new or advanced ways of assessing data or asking novel research questions, and then that theory changes yet again. And so it's really important that when we are looking at research, that we should be able to constantly change the theories that we have based on new information that we receive. So the scientific approach takes into account 4 different attitudes. The first being curiosity, the second, skepticism, the third, objectivity, and then the fourth is thinking critically. And so all of these things are really important ways to approach and look at research. Well, and your book goes into these in much greater detail. So how do theories fit in, right? Because I kept talking about how we have these theories. Well, I would consider theories to be these overarching, this umbrella under which we can form and test ideas. So our theories are actually going to be these organized sets of principles that allow a person to describe and explain some aspect of an experience. What makes a good theory then? Well, in order for a theory to be good, it needs to be falsifiable. I should be able to disprove it. And why is this important? Well, if I have a theory that I can never disprove, then how will I ever add to that set of data? So if you've had other classes with me, you may have heard of this example before, but I think it's a fantastic one. So back during the plague, the well-known theory or the well-known idea of how to treat the plague was something called bloodletting. It's exactly what it sounds like. You would cut the person and you would let their blood. The idea being that the bad blood in a person's body leaves their body and is then replaced with good blood. We now know that that's not how disease progression works, but at the time it's what we had. So let's say that this is the idea that we're working with. Well, we can test this, right? So when a person gets sick, we let their blood. If bloodletting works, they should get better, right? If bloodletting doesn't work, they should get worse, right? But that's not what was stated. It was stated that if the bloodletting, that we let your blood, if you got better, bloodletting worked. If you didn't get better, it wasn't the bloodletting that was the problem. It was that you were too far along in your disease progression for the bloodletting to work. This creates this kind of creates the standard where we can't disprove what's taking place. So that means that we can never disprove that bloodletting isn't an effective treatment to deal with a plague. This is problematic beyond belief, right? And so this goes back to the crux, which is that a good theory must be falsifiable. Our hypothesis then is going to be a testable prediction about the conditions under which an event will occur. So these are going to be derived from much more general theories. When we think about kind of theories should be parsimonious. They should be easy to understand. They should also have good heuristics, meaning that they should be able to evolve over time. I should be able to modify them or change them based on the evidence that I am met with. So your book then goes into talking about ways of knowing. How do we know things? Well, sometimes we know things based on intuition. You might have heard this as your gut. My gut is telling me that this is the correct answer. But it relies on personal judgment. And unfortunately, people are wrong. No matter how great you think that your intuition is or your gut judgment is, you can make erroneous conclusions about this. So we can't just go off of intuition. We can also think about things like the illusory correlation. This is a kind of belief that two items that aren't really related somehow has a relationship. You may have heard about this where a couple is trying really, really, really hard to have a baby. And then they adopt a child, and then all of a sudden they now get pregnant. Inevitably, we either know somebody who that's happened with, or we know someone who knew someone who knew someone that's happened to, right? There's always somebody who's told us that, oh yeah, do you remember Uncle Johnny? Well, Uncle Johnny's sister, this happened to them. So we've kind of heard this play out. The reality is that we believe that there's an association with this. People usually say something like, you decrease your stress and, boom, you have a baby. While this might occur for some people, based on our research, we actually know that most individuals who struggle with infertility are very unlikely, even if they adopt a child, to subsequently have a child after that. So there's probably other things that are going on. But because we've all been privy, or we kind of know somebody who this has happened to, or at least we've heard of it happening so frequently, we make an association that happens often. And this is done in error, and we talk about this as being sort of this illusory correlation. The other way we might know things is because somebody of authority tells us. I'm telling you about things in research methods, and if you just trusted me and you didn't read your textbook and you didn't look through information and you didn't come to class and ask questions, then you're just accepting what I'm saying, and I could potentially tell you anything, right? We oftentimes accept statements out of faith from people of authority. But we know from our history that we probably shouldn't be doing this. And so the scientific approach actually rejects this notion of authority. It doesn't matter if I tell you or somebody else tells you, we should be able to objectively look at something and find those results. Okay. We talk about the idea, and your book kind of talks about this idea of skepticism. So when we're thinking about how we know things or why we know things, we should always approach everything with sort of a healthy dose of skepticism. We should be able to evaluate based on logic and scientific investigation, not because somebody told us something, right? Or because we have this gut feeling about it. And when we think about research, And you'll kind of hear this term thrown out a lot. What's the empirical evidence on this? And empiricism is this idea that knowledge is based on observation, but careful observation, observation that is using data. And these things, so using data to figure out why something has happened is exceedingly important, right? So now my knowledge isn't coming from what I think and what I feel. This is knowledge that's coming from direct data and research and observation in a controlled setting with really important parameters. And we're going to talk about observational research and some of those things in upcoming chapters, and maybe even some of the issues associated with them. One of the pitfalls in research is falling kind of prey to what we call pseudoscience. I say that you can actually see pseudoscience all the time. In fact, a lot of beauty products rely on pseudoscience when they talk about these special binding agents that attach to your hair and regenerate its growth. When we think about pseudoscience, this is taking a topic that hasn't actually been extensively studied, using very scientific terms to make a claim, right? So using molecules or using these terms that we know are very science oriented to describe a phenomenon that hasn't actually been empirically tested at all. We, very much watch out for this. Like I said, beauty products do this quite frequently. I remember watching something, Cindy Crawford had some new skincare product, and they were these exotic melons that grew in France or Italy. And, they were talking about how this regenerates this, this growth of your skin. But the terms they were using to describe it used a lot of scientific jargon, but really didn't have a whole heck of a lot of meaning. So, kind of thinking about this, don't fall into that trap with that pseudoscience. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this section right here, and then I'm going to pick us back up talking about the difference between basic and applied research.